This week, a lot of interesting things are happening. My country's having a presidential election. My best friend is getting married. I'm picking up two books from two of my favorite authors. I'm reading part one of The Stand by Stephen King. This monster is over 1,400 pages. I've been reading a chapter or two of it a week for the last month and a half. And I finally am committing to reading one part of this book a week. So this week, I'm finishing part one. That's about 130 pages. I also am picking up Fredrik Backman's newest release. The answer is no. This is a short story. I'm not sure what it's about. But Fredrik Backman writes love. He writes awkward characters. He writes found family just as good as anyone writing fiction today. So, yes, this week I have a lot of things to get done. I have a lot of emotions I'm going to be feeling. And I think the books are going to complement my experiences this week. Welcome to the reading vlog. Tuesday. I'm exhausted. I did not read. I got my tooth fixed, though, so that's good. America has a new president, so that's interesting. This political science major was checking the score, checking the vote this entire day. And this is my Super Bowl. As someone who has worked on campaigns since he was in high school, this is a very exciting event. Every 4 years, I feel like a drug addict checking the elections, waiting for the next fix, getting the information, watching the numbers, watching the polls, watching the returns. And it was a very compelling, interesting night. Lots of data to observe and to analyze. I think I might make a video where it's like 5 books you should read to understand the MAGA movement, because yes, the MAGA movement is a very unique modern political phenomenon, but there's been a lot of interesting political phenomenons in American history. And I think there's about 5 books I would recommend to somebody who wants to understand what has just happened. So yeah, maybe I'll get that done sometime. The Stand is about the end of the world. And I woke up this beautiful Wednesday morning and I open up social media because I'm an addict, and I go to TikTok. And I was not prepared for how crazy book talk was going to be during the aftermath of a presidential election. All these people who primarily talk about smut, Brandon Sanderson, and Stephen King, all of a sudden they are intellectuals, intellectuals in political science, intellectuals in economics, and they're telling everybody how could this happen? How could we elect this person to the presidency? The world's falling apart. Books are going to get burned. We're going to be slaves again. And I'm like, what are you guys reading? Where'd you get this information? We're on Book Talk. I see what you're reading. I see the information you're exposed to. And as a bookworm with a job, I didn't have time to work on the campaigns. This is one of the first presidential campaigns I did not volunteer for. So I know y'all weren't doing that. But now, because social media incentivizes division and content that sparks conflict, all these book talkers are talking about politics to get some interactions. And I'm gonna stay off book talk for this week because I'm not even going to enter that like landscape because I just want to talk about books. Political science is my background, and even I don't want to talk about it all the time. But it did give me a very interesting idea for a YouTube video, and I'm going to make a YouTube video about how the election destroyed book talk very soon. So tomorrow, my best friend gets married. And it has me thinking about loneliness because loneliness is a very central theme in part one of The Stand and in Fredrik Backman's The Answer is No. In The Stand, the world is being destroyed by a pandemic. And a lot of our characters are isolated, alone. They're walking through the wastelands of America and they're not encountering another soul. And they're all dealing with the loneliness, dealing with the isolation in a different way. They have different coping mechanisms and they're all suffering in slightly different ways, but the culprit is the same for all of them. Loneliness. And the answer is no. Our protagonist is an introvert. He does not want to hang out with anybody. He does not want to have human connections, or at least he thinks he doesn't want to have those things. But because of things outside of his control, he is forced into dealing with other people, building human connection, trying to build consensus, working on problems. And perhaps he's learning that he really does want to have human connection. And because my friend is getting married, It reminds me a lot of the Bible quote, "It is not good that man should be alone." We were not born, we were not created, did not evolve to live in isolation. We aren't human without the other humans around us. And that's just what I'm thinking about. I love the way that Stephen King and Frederick Bachman are able to portray loneliness and the ill that it brings to one's life, and how a life separate from your fellow man really isn't much of a life at all. And they're both talking about the same plight in different words and a different tone. And yeah, really dang good stuff. A few quick thoughts about the answer is no. I love books that are centered around introverts. I'm an extrovert myself, but I do appreciate time alone. I do appreciate the quiet hours. I do appreciate doing things by myself. But I do need human connection. I do need time with my friends and family. And the main character of the answer is no. He is very much the opposite. He lives in isolation, he works from home, he orders all of his food as takeout, he lives in an apartment, and he lives his life in a way that limits as much as possible the human interaction he deals with. And I think this is something that a lot of people in the modern day are dealing with. We are so disconnected from people. Humans evolved to live in close knit groups, big family groups, several generations all in one area, having friends, and you all had to work together to survive. But in the modern world, we're seeing a new lifestyle appear, the isolated, autonomous individual. And I'm not sure if that's a good sign or a bad sign. And I wonder what's going to happen to society as we all become more isolated and more self sufficient. Well, economically self sufficient because, there's a lot more technology, there's a lot more comfort, and somebody's obviously producing that. But it's becoming more and more likely that humans around the world will be able to live without leaning on others every day, without interaction. And I think it's bad for the soul, but maybe good for big business. I think it's maybe good for like financial institutions. I think as long as we're forced to consume, we're never going to truly be isolated from one another. But yeah, that's just what I'm thinking about. The election has me thinking a lot about like the future and what's going to happen to the human race. Here are some things that are making me very excited about The Stand. Perhaps these are spoilers without context. You won't be able to understand it unless you've read it. But I have encountered the main good guy. Because if you read the blurb at the back of The Stand, it takes place in the aftermath of a giant pandemic, and one group of people is going to be led by this good person, one group of people is going to be led by this bad person. And I've met the good person, and I love them. That scene was so beautiful. My favorite POV character so far is Nick Andros. He's a deaf mute, and I love him. He's already made me cry twice. Like, I can't imagine being isolated in a world where almost everyone is gone. But being isolated in a world where everyone is gone and I'm a deaf mute and I'm still trying to find people, I'm still trying to make human connection, but I have that barrier in between me, that one boundary, and it's just a terrifying idea. I also really like the biblical allusions throughout The Stand. Like Stephen King, he's not religious, but he does a very good job at putting like religious allusions, religious imagery in his stories in a very natural way that's very recognizable. And I like that. Like he just did a play on when Satan is tempting Jesus in the wilderness, and it's like, bow down, worship me, I'll give you everything you want. And that scene was just so powerful in The Stand. So, yes, I think I'm finally reaching that tipping point where I'm going to have an easier time binging The Stand. And I'm glad because I was worried that it was going to be slow going the entire time. Saturday, the wedding was a success. My best man toast went okay, from what I hear. It's a different beast getting to a wedding with a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old. You live in a different city, commuting with the wife, helping to set things up, doing the wedding stuff, rehearsals, breaking down, driving back home, no food because of your celiac disease. It was a long day, and I earned my rest. Sunday, I finished The Answer Is No by Frederick Bachman. I really liked it. I would only rate it 4 out of 5 stars. I really liked the concept. I really liked the characters. I really liked the dialogue, the central message about how loneliness is not for anybody. You may prefer to keep to yourself. You may be an introvert. But at the end of the day, eventually you're going to need somebody. You're going to look for human connection, and you're going to realize that without human connection, life is not worth living. I also finished part 1 of The Stand, so I'm about 33% done. The second part, way fewer chapters. They're much longer chapters, but the second part has like 150 more pages. So next week, I'll be reading part 2 of The Stand. I'm glad I finally passed the inertia point of this massive book, because I've been reading a chapter or 2 a week for the last month and a half or so, and it's really slow going. The first part is just the pandemic is destroying the world. We're getting to know these characters, and it's so slow moving. It wasn't even at the thriller stage of this massive thriller, but after part 1, well, the last 2 chapters of part 1, I have finally reached that inertia point. I am emotionally invested. There's one duo in particular that I really love. And a hint to those that have read it, Nick Andros meets somebody, and I love their friendship. I think it's going to turn into something beautiful and tragic. This week, I'm not sure about the page count. I think I might stop keeping track of the pages I'm reading per week. I don't think it's important. I think I focus too much on page count sometimes. But I did finish one little book, a short story. The answer is no. And I finished the first part of The Stand. And I'm going to get The Stand done before the end of November, because I have about 9 other books that are priority reads before the end of this year. And The Stand is the only thing standing between me and reading those books. This week was very eventful. I have all my teeth. I got a fresh haircut. My best friend got married. We have a new president. I read the first part of The Stand, and I read another book from Frederick Bachman, perhaps my second or third favorite author. This week was a really good week. Next week's going to be even better. Thank you guys for watching my reading vlog, where I read and I think about things. I'm Sir Jordan Drew, and I'll talk to you guys next time.